Hello and welcome into the SorareData Football Strategy Show. I'm Andrew Laird. You can find me as Lairdinho on Sorare, joined once again by Sean Newsham, PSU fans too. Sean, quick question before we get into anything important. When someone says something starts at a specific time, do you expect it to start the second it becomes that time or within that minute of time?
I think within that minute's reasonable. I mean, you don't usually start this show within that minute, but I mean, I think within that minute is reasonable.
I think I normally start it within that minute, and it's everybody who points them out. Like when I happen to be late, that's when everybody points it out. It's like all the times that it's fine, everyone's like, oh yeah, okay. They don't even think about it. And then we get to like 1 minute after it's 10 a.m. here, and everybody like starts to lose their shit.
I mean, I'm pretty sure people say it literally every week.
But I think people say it every week, but it doesn't actually happen every week.
But you just said that people only say it when you're actually late.
I did say that. You're right. I don't think it happens every week.
Hey, I mean, I'm here on time every week. So
thank you, everyone, for joining, including some people who showed up like 90 minutes early to like be like, hey. Oh, actually, Chris was first and said, see you guys in a bit. So at least Chris knew that we might have been late. But anyway. Thank you to everybody. It was actually Nep's account that said late or no, that I was like, oh, wait, we should start. And then we started within the minute. And Elliot said Lairdinho literally at 10 o'clock my time.
The intro was already running, to be fair, when he said that.
Right. See?
Yeah. So the intro was running when he said that.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us, particularly Alex Wilson for Forza Midtjylland, which I might just start doing all the time. But yeah, appreciate everybody coming in. If you could please like and subscribe, even though that stuff apparently doesn't matter, but it makes me feel good. So anyway, Sean, I only had one thing to talk about today. And I definitely build this as like we had this long list of things that people think are important that actually aren't, but I actually only have one. And the more I think of it, the more I think I might be wrong anyway. But we're going to talk about it anyway. So there's that. Somebody actually brought up the fact that it might be easier to actually talk about, who is it, Jakun, unimportant things that do matter is easier to talk about, which maybe we'll get into that too. Who knows? Maybe it's just a whole scale of importance. Before I say mine, since I only have one, were there any that like at least immediately popped into your head when I told you what we were talking about today?
I mean, yes, to some extent. I mean, watching your show on Friday when you basically called me an innovator to the game, which is effectively what you did.
Thank you for watching.
Yes, you're welcome. With my creation of stacking.
You like, I don't think you invented stacking, but I think you were the one who brought it out in the open in Sorare, or maybe it was just open and I just hadn't seen people talk about it. But I do think that it was important, and I think you deserve credit for that for sure.
Yeah, no, I definitely think I was the one that pushed it, right? And I still do think that this is like, it is a good way for more budget-friendly players to compete at a high level certain times of the year. Yep. However, I think it's gone a lot further than where it should. And I think this is typically when things happen, right? And when things get changed and things improve or sort of like go forward into the future, people lag behind with like how to do things. And I think that stacking is a good example of that. People are like all about stacking and like, but I see on Twitter, it's like, you see like a Burnley stack and someone's like, I'm going to stack Burnley. It's like, that's not the exact idea of stacking. The idea behind stacking, you talked about it with Madron and the Chicago Fire stack, is like, if you look back at that, like Madron was a pretty elite level scorer back then. He still would be, I would assume, if he was in the league. If he was in the league and he's scoring like 60 to 80 points and they get smacked, at some point during the season, like he's gonna connect with his striker, and the striker is gonna get a decisive, and he's gonna have 100, and they're gonna get a clean sheet, and all of a sudden you're up to a huge level. That's like not as like relevant when you have a team like Burnley, who's just like, all right, you got these Burnley guys who are just likely like poop regardless. So like, yeah, you look at this, like Madron was a guy that had some major upside. So like, let's go scroll down here and look at some of his like 100-point games, and you're gonna see like, I'm sure on some of these games, Madron, so like against the Revs, I'm sure at some point in these games, like he connected with his striker and his striker got a goal. So like this game, Bear didn't get a goal, but like Aliseda did. So like all of a sudden,
Is this the greatest game you've ever seen, by the way, with 100 from Madron and a 91 from Carlos Seal?
it feels great. I mean, I love it immensely. So
You need a
it's
moment by
something.
yourself?
Oh, Match Slow just asked a good question. Does Reynoso play in game week 394 or 395, Laird? That's a great question, which we'll get into later about things. But I just think stacking has gone too far. And I think other things within that realm have also gotten to be murky. So I'll give you an example that I'm sure Haber will pop in here, but I had to give him the Euromoron call last night. So you talk about everyone stacking the same teams, which I agree with is kind of an issue, and you probably shouldn't go to those teams. And it's why you went to Midland. And I think Midland makes a lot of sense because they're a pretty good team. They can put up some pretty big scores. As you saw this weekend, Isaacson left you wanting more. But it was there. It had an opportunity. It was a good shot at it. There's teams like that, like Genk, like Bruges, other teams that are just not stacked as much recently that you can do stuff with. But the thing is like, so Haber's telling me this story, and he's like, Haber now has this stack for Galatasaray. I'm going to see what your reaction to this is with what he wants to do. So he has Muslera, Angelino, Icardi, and Actorglue. Super rares. He has all 4 super rares. So I'm like, okay, great. That makes a lot of sense. I think you should get like Bardaki or something. He has all the super rares, and he's like, no, everyone's stacking Galatasaray. Everyone's all about Galatasaray, and they're just stacking them, and it's all Galatasaray. I can't do it. There's like 6 people with the exact same stack as me. He literally, I'm like, all right, tell me the 6 people that have the exact same stack as you. Because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, you're a moron. I know you're a moron. Let's see how strong you stick with this, right? First person, he's like, Josh Forth has the same stack as me. I'm like, that's a good example because I literally know for sure that's full of shit because I know.
Yeah.
So I'm like, great, perfect example. So I'm like looking at this. I'm looking at Josh Forth. I'm like, all right. So looking at Josh Forth's gallery, you guys share the same stack. He has Muslera and Muslera and then Muslera and then Muslera. So I'm like,
no, he has Bardaki too.
He does, but Haber doesn't have Bardaki.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, Haber doesn't have Bardaki. I'm like, yeah, you guys totally share the same stack. You guys have the goalie. That's it. Nothing else. I'm like, so that's a terrible example. I'm like, all right, who's next? Gives me the next person. I'm like, or he gives me Dan Bad, Sorare Mexico. I'm like, all right, cool. Let me go check his, because I do know he's building this. I know he's building the Galatasaray stack. I'm like, all right, let me go check it out. He has like Angelino, Muslera, and Bardaki. I'm like, all right, again, you don't have the same stack as him. And then he's like, gives me this other guy. And I'm like, all right, you share Muslera with this guy. I'm like, I think you are missing the point. I'm like, Laird's comments and his discussion about like the same people running the same stacks and having the same stuff, it works differently at like D3 and D4 and D5. Like if people are doing the stacks, like that is where it's more relevant. D2, it's almost never relevant because it's very hard for people to have full stacks of the team with the best players in them. So I told him, I'm like, I think that I think that he should get Bardaki. And he's like, well, I want to have a differential, so I'm different from everyone. I'm like, you're already different from everyone. No one has your same line. But I said, I'm like, I don't care what you do. And then at the end, he basically sent me like a GIF of, he's like, yeah, so I think I was lying. He's like, and then he sent me like a GIF of, let me see what it was. It was like a photo of this lady watching YouTube videos of reacting to her line. And that was what he sent me. But yeah, so anyways, I think that stacking has gone overboard and people trying to differentiate within stacking has gone overboard. But as you said, like on the show Friday, I've sort of geared away from total stacking. Not saying stacking's bad. Like having a stack when a team plays an island game is great. Like it's awesome. So having it available is huge. But like on a weekend, if you're sitting there and you're looking at a team and you're playing a forward and let's say Midland, you're using Midland and you have I know you don't have them yet, but like you have a Choge Sung rare and you're just playing a full stack with him. But then you have Messi sitting there who's just going to rip 100. And you're like, I'm going to play Choge Sun. And it's like, well, you just improve your stack by just playing Messi with it. And so I think that stacking is still good, but I think that people have like overblown stacking and people have like just focused as hard as possible on getting stacks. I'm not saying stacking's bad because I think that that you can still do it effectively. And I still do think it is a good way for people to sort of value play Sorare a bit. But you can do things to improve upon your stack on a week-to-week basis.
So I'm glad you brought up stacking because that was the only other one that I was like starting to think about. And you actually touched on one of the things that I think people do wrong, meaning the one thing I think people do wrong. But anyway, in the stacking, I do think that people stack the opposite way that they should.
Yeah.
And that when you did the fire stack, and I didn't bring this up because on Friday, because I basically didn't really think of it until you just mentioned it. You found an elite player in Alvaro Madron and built a stack around him.
Correct.
Instead of finding a team and buying 5 of their players.
Correct.
And one of the big things that I think a lot of people are missing is you need to have at least one good, like you need people who can score a lot of points. You don't just need 5 guys who play together. And that's who just brought this up. Malky said, how contrarian are you supposed to be though? Surely if you choose a Toronto stack, for example, there's nothing but upside. They can't get relegated and they surely can't be worse than they are now. Being better than being the worst team in Major League Soccer does not make them a good team to stack to beat everyone else you need to compete with.
Correct.
And they don't have any good players anyway.
But like if they had like, let's say Insigne was
actually good,
was actually good and was like a 65 player. All right, then all of a sudden it makes sense because you're just sitting there playing it to the idea of like when they have a good game, he's probably gonna pop off, which is fine. But again, you touched on Friday, and I think it's fair. Like you don't have to have a full team stack. You can have like a defensive stack from team and then an offensive stack. Because like last year, and I know 20 smashed it, right? 20 killed it most of the year, but like you could have had a Understall, Geese Small proper stack, and then you could have had Carlos Gil, Lionel Messi. And like that works better probably than running out Zaruki and Ricky Van Wolfswinkel or whatever.
Yeah.
Or Ugalde, whoever. So like there's just different ways to like improve upon your stack at different times. Now that said, when Carlos Gil and Lionel Messi aren't playing and FC20 is the only team playing, having those guys is good because you can still run it out. So I'm just saying you don't have to get tied to running your full stack every weekend. And part of the reason that I sort of am running this Galatasaray stack is because I believe Angelino has the upside to be like Grimaldo, Douglas Santos, those type of defenders. Like that is how he's built. And I think he has a chance to get there. Will he? Probably not. Who knows? But like, at least like looking at him objectively and looking at his game and the style he plays, like we've never seen him on an elite level team. We've never seen Angelino on a team that's just going to dominate the game. Galatasaray, in theory, is going to be dominant all year. We've never really seen him in a situation where he has that opportunity. He likely will be on some sets, if not a majority of the sets. So all of a sudden, you literally have like what you had with Grimaldo, Douglas Santos, Daley Blind when he was at Ajax. And granted, he didn't take the penalties, but like the way that these guys rack their points is from like final third passing and like passing around the box area. So like my plan was like I have this Galatasaray stack that I can run, or I can break off the Muslera and Angelino's parts of it, run it with Gil, Messi, Bruno Fernandes, Super. Who knows? But like, so I have ways to like, I'm not going to run the Galatasaray stack 100% of weeks. I'm going to have opportunities to run it and then break off other parts of it to make my lines better and improve upon that way. So there's different ways to run it, and you just have to be open to ideas. Like, I'm not going to, like, if you look at my lineups this year, it's not going to be a Galatasaray stack 100% of the weekends in the same lineup.
Yeah, so I think that touches exactly the point that I wanted to make, that you're likely making suboptimal decisions if you run this 5-player stack every game week, or even every game week that they have a good matchup. And a few people have like mentioned in the chat that, so Techers is the one I found. There's higher correlation when stacking goalkeepers and defenders. As you know, the clean sheet gives bonus to both players, like, which we've all talked about. Like, we know this. However, there's no guarantees that the attacking stack assist each other. This, I think, is like right and misses something, that if a team is like heavily dominant in possession, like, you don't necessarily need to have a double decisive, like one player assisting the other. Like, you can still get some pretty high scores, all around scores, just from passing and all the other stuff that is in the matrix. So I think that the pushback on attacking stats, that like the goal assist combinations like don't happen as much as you think they are. Like, obviously they help, but I think you can still be like very successful in that way. But people run stacks, 5-player stacks, when they shouldn't, when they clearly have a better option in one position. They're like, I just don't really want to break this up. And it's like, you are breaking this up and you are making a worse lineup because of it. And if you know that going in, you do you. I'm happy for you to make worse lineups that I can compete against. But I think people build these stacks and don't realize that like the real reason you do them is to make sure that you have 5 guys in these island situations, or not even when it's like they're an island game, but like when they're the only league that's playing on that week. Like, sometimes those things happen, and that's when you like really take advantage of it. And if you're hurting your lineups in all of the other situations, then you're doing the stack way wrong. And but to go back to the Haber thing, I think his situation is completely different, and you kind of touched on it. Like, the number of people who could duplicate a super rare stack is so low that not only do they have to make the exact same stack, but they also have to end up playing it in the same division that you do. Like, Haber can play this Galatasaray stack in Challenger or an All-Star. My guess is he would play it in All-Star normally, but whoever the 5th one is, like, if there was someone who had the same lineup, which is going to be so unbelievably rare that I don't even think it's worth thinking about on the super rare level, as opposed to, like, I get it if you're doing it on the limited and rare level. Because the example I used on the show, like, it's not that many people, like, when you really think about it.
Yeah.
But the fact that I've seen multiple people on Twitter be like, hey, here's my Liverpool stack, and it's the same one, like Alisson, Virgil van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold, probably Alexis McAllister, and Salah. And people are like, I'm going to win with everything here. And it's like, all right, but there are other people who are planning to do this. And that's probably not even the best. Like, that's actually a great example, because we've talked about this. Like, the best PSG stack last year had Kimmich in it.
Yeah.
The best Liverpool one probably has Kimmich in it too.
Yeah.
So you're making a worse lineup because you're playing Alexis McAllister or Shizbalai, or however you say. How do you say his name?
Jobalai.
I mean, you just said 3 different ways. So,
whoa, Shizbalai.
Shozbalai? I don't know. Jobalai? I don't know. But if you play him, like
Jobojlai.
Soboslai is what
that's probably better.
Chani is claiming. Chani always corrects me, and I never know if it's right, but I end up going with it anyway.
Pudini is DMing me laughing at my Turkish pronunciations.
I mean, nobody's watching this for correct pronunciations. But anyway, my guess is that the best lineup that includes 4 Liverpool players doesn't have a 5th Liverpool player, and that's the point.
Yeah, that's but you want to have that guy for when they have totally random games. So, like, a couple people have mentioned stuff. I'm gonna go through them real quick, and then we'll go back. So I do not know how to pronounce your name because it is. But stacking works in the midweek, 100%. Stacking a lot more of the time is going to be more relevant during midweeks than it will be on the weekend. Jose Rosales said that I want to say sometimes stacking is the lazy way to get lineups done. Totally. And that's why I think a lot of people do it, is because it's a lot more easy way to do it which leads into A126 says that he wants to stack because he wants to plan on having less teams to follow. 100%. I think those are good reasons for stacking. Those are logical options. Like stacking is a lot more of a feasible option. Like if you only have to follow one team and you know what that team's going to do, it makes it a lot more simple. Counterpoint to what Laird is just saying, like if you have that Liverpool stack with Kimmich, you don't really have to look much into Kimmich to know if Kimmich's playing. Like you're not really having to look deep to be like, all right, is Kimmich gonna play or is Kimmich not gonna play? Like you just know Kimmich is gonna play. Yeah, Pico said that Jobalai is Hungarian, not Turkish, which I think Laird knew, but maybe Laird didn't know. But I definitely knew that.
I think it was that you were getting laughed at about your Turkish pronunciation.
Yeah. That was a separate.
Everybody knows it's Soboslai.
Haber has shown up because I told him I was able to shit talk him about.
Oh, here we go.
His nonsense yesterday. I will give Haber credit. At least Haber like backs off his claims when he knows he's wrong. So, Soboslai. Okay. Anyways, yeah. So I think that the stacking is the one that makes sense to me. I have a couple others, but we can go. So my guess. Can I guess what yours is?
Yeah.
Yours is you're going to say people playing super rares instead of rares in like Rare Pro when the rares are better players.
No.
Okay.
That is a good one though. No, mine is people putting a value or an emphasis on low minted players as differentials.
I buy that. I agree with that too.
So the number of people who will get a card and they're like, this one is great because there are only like 17 rares. And so if he goes off, I'm like the only one who will have him. There are so many players in this game that can match whatever score that player puts up that the differential doesn't matter. Like having 17 or 5 rares or 12 limiteds or whatever it is, there's going to be somebody else who's just as random who scores that whatever this guy scores, and you get no extra points if your 17 rare card player scores 85 and someone else scores 86. Like you lose. And so I feel like there's a lot of justification for people like either overpaying for cards because they're like, oh, it's low scarcity or high scarcity, low mint count because he only has so many cards, and it's just you end up playing that card more often than you should just because you're like, no one else is going to get this 73 points. And it's like, there are a lot of ways for people to get 73 points. And this player that nobody else owns doesn't matter.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, that's the thing is like, people are like, well, I need to have a differential and stuff. It's like, dude, if you look at most lineups, unless you're like full stacking or just playing the elite level people, no one has the same lineup as you. Like you are going to be different regardless. Like, yeah, you might have 3 or 4 players the same a lot of the time, but the sad thing is the most important position is goalie. Like if you are, the biggest differential you can do is get your goalie right, and other people just not get their goalie right. That's like the biggest differential on the platform. The issue is you just can't really predict it perfectly, and it's just a pain in the ass. But it is the most impactful thing. Like goalie, without a doubt, is the most impactful position on the platform.
Yeah. Hold on. I'm glad because 2 people brought this up, and I actually wasn't thinking of this, but I'm glad you did. So Chani pointed out, so Nep has a Dennis Vavro super rare, and it's the only one on the platform. And so every time Vavro has a game, Nep's the only one who gets these scores. These are not scores that like no one else can get. Like you can find these scores with other players that other people have, and you can beat Nep. Like it doesn't matter that he has the only one.
I'm not gonna lie. I thought you were just taking an underhanded shot at Nep. So, but I agree with your stance. Like I think, don't get me wrong. Like having
I'll overhand Nep. I don't need to underhand. Insult him.
I with having guys with low amounts of cards is good. Like it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's just also not something that matters tremendously. I want this is the way, and this is gonna sound dumb as shit, but it's true. You know what guys I want to play, Laird? The guys that score the most points. That's the goal. I don't care if they're low owned or high owned. I'm going to play the guy that I think is going to score the most points. And if my guys all score the most points and I lose because someone else had a line that also scored the most points and had slightly better XP. It is what it is. But you know what? I'm going to get second or third. Like, it just is what it is. Like, I want the guys that are going to score the most points, have the most chance to get that upside.
Yeah. So I don't want people to confuse really good scoring players with low minted players who score well. Because like Haber brought up Oscar.
Yeah.
Oscar. So like he would be the best player on the platform if he had cards right now. If he had one card and whoever owned it. So that was the point. If there was one card like that on the platform, like it would make a difference. But it only makes a difference if there are 4 other guys in that lineup that score really well. And otherwise it's just wasted. And yes, you're not going to find someone else who has like a 97 L40 or whatever he has in China. But most players, low minted or highly minted, like have other players that score like them. And just having one that happens to be low minted doesn't make a huge difference.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. Like, I think that there's a lot of merit within what you're saying. So I'm going to give another one that I think that people blow out of proportion, and we talk about too. And I think it works both ways, but playing a card that has like more XP that just is a much worse card. I think some people do that, but like, guys,
this is actually going to get worse too. Like, keep going and I'll tell you why. Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. Like, people need to look at cards more closely, I think. So, for example, if I have a Carlos Gil super, or if I have a Carlos Gil rare, and you have a Frankie Amaya super rare, the Gil is still a better card because on average, he'll score like 70 a game, where Amaya's going to score like 50. So if you give him the extra 20% boost, all of a sudden it's a 60 card. You're still behind on the Gil. People look at it and they'll be like, I'm going to play this guy. It's just a much worse card. Another thing that sort of ties into
Doesn't that go back to the whole forcing super rares in though?
Yeah. But I think there's also, this is why it goes to the other side. People then also play rares that are worse than the super rares they could have played, because the super rares always have more upside. If a super rare hits 100 and a rare hits 100, the super rare scores a lot more points than the rare does. So it works both ways. There's 2 situations where things are the exact same, but they're different in the same way. Like, they break off, and it makes sense both ways. Like, where both issues are issues. But yeah, like, I just think people look at stuff and they play guys that that score worse or better, and they don't look at the proper sort of input that they need to look at to see what's better. And then another option that ties in with all this is people just like to play guys that score well without any thought to whether or not they're likely to play or not. Like, people will take more risks than they should with cards they shouldn't take risks with. For example, if you think Messi's going to rip 100, and no doubt, like, just like Messi's going to rip 100, and then you're like, I'm going to play him with this guy that's going to get 100, but 50% of the time he doesn't start and he gets 20. That card isn't a 100-point card. That's the guy that has massive risks, just implode your Messi lineup. And I think people take a lot of risks that they shouldn't be taking because they just don't really understand the risk they're taking.
So to piggyback on that, I think people take risks because of like how much they paid for a card, and they're like, I need to start like getting my return back on this card, and so they just like force it into lineups, and then they just ruin the return of the 4 other cards in those lineups.
This sounds like Harry Trades, and it sounds like the Harry Trades Ansu Fati like take that he had for like months, where I told him, I'm like, owning this card is going to cost you way more than not owning this card. And I think it did, because he probably played it like multiple times and just got buried with it.
Right. To go back to the XP thing, and I feel like I mentioned this last week, but I thought about it. I have no idea if I actually mentioned it, but I think I thought you were going with the XP, it was less about rare, super rare, and more like, this card doesn't have high XP, so I'm not going to play it, or I'm playing this card because it has high XP, even though this lower XP card is better. Like, just in like 2 rares. Like, this one has 3% and this one has 8%, but like the 3% card is likely to score 20 points more anyway. And I think people are going to start doing this with fitness bonuses where they're going to have a player who's like 2% fitness, and they're like, that 2%, the 10% to 2% gap's too big, so I can't play this card. When in fact, whatever they're going to play instead is a much worse card. Like, people are going to compare it to what other people have. So it'd be the equivalent of me looking at your Carlos Heel card. And let's say yours is at 10% XP and mine's at 8.5. And I'm like, well, I just can't play mine because Sean has a 10%. Like, people are going to do this, thinking they're trailing in XP and not play their better cards just because they have ones that have higher XP that are going to score less.
Yep. Sorry. I agree. I think that it is a definite mistake that people are making. But yeah, I think that there is others as well that I'm trying to think of off the top of my head. I think there are one thing that I think people don't do well at is they don't prioritize making the best lineup. Like, they will have cards and they will like run them in different spots when it's a quantity over quality thing. And sometimes you have to choose quality. Not every time, but like certain situations, it's just like one very good lineup is better than two mediocre lineups almost every time. And I think that's a real struggle for people to understand.
I think that's literally the biggest struggle of anything in Sorare. That you're just like, I would rather have 2 bites at the apple. And you're like, okay, well, neither of these are really that competitive, but you have one really competitive one. And people are like, yeah, but I want 2 lineups. It is the hardest thing on Sorare, I think. Yeah.
Something that I used to be guilty of, though, is this that ties in with this. I used to be guilty of being way too risk averse and not playing guys that had risk. Sometimes, like, you look at your lineup and you're like, well, I can play this guy that's not good and my lineup's just dog shit, or I can play this guy who's like 50% to play, but if he plays, the lineup's pretty good. Sometimes you have to take that risk and you just have to play that guy. Just know that, like, if he doesn't play, you lose, but if you don't play him, you're going to lose anyways. And I think that's also a tricky situation. It's pretty funny, actually. Like, you look at a lot of the things that I think people don't do well on the platform. There's like 2 sides to it, and both sides are like done poorly, right? This situation is like, you don't take too much risk, but also sometimes you have to take a lot of risk. So it's a different situation. It depends a lot on your lineups that you have to consider. And I think that people, the proper situations, right? Like I'll give myself as an example here because it's the easiest example I can give because I know my thought process here. At the beginning, when I first started playing, I stacked everything. And I like tried to stack almost everything, and that was like my game plan. Now I stack a lot. Like, if I'm playing a defender or a goalie, like, I'm almost always going to play them together because it doesn't make sense not to. Because if you look at it like this, and I talked to Haber about this one time when he like switched up his hedge and screwed him up. But like, if you play a goalie with your defender or not with your defender, like your lineup is most likely dead if your goalie doesn't get a clean sheet. Not dead, but like you're most likely
you're not top end podiums
unless they get a clean sheet or like a penalty save. Penalty saves, obviously, you can't really do much about. But so, like, if your goalie gets a clean sheet, you just factor in. You say if it's like an if-then situation, right? You learned these back in school. If my goalie gets a clean sheet, this defender starts on 45 points. If my goalie concedes, this defender starts on 31 points. And it's a situation where it's like, if you're playing a lineup and you're not playing, and you have a defender and you can play him with him, and he scores well if they get a clean sheet, and your goalie's there, well, you need to play them together because they're going to get a clean sheet. So like, I went from not stacking like everything, like full teams, even if they weren't as good of teams, like leaving out better players that would have improved my lineups, to stacking still, however, strategically stacking, where if I have like a very blatant spot where I have a better player, I can plug them into it instead as well. Then with this situation, I started back when I first started, I would take no risks. I'd play like these turd boxes, like that would just be terrible because I was worried someone else wasn't going to play. And I would worry a lot more about rotation and know that I was going to get, that I just didn't want to eat the rotation. I have now shifted towards like, there's a lot more risk I will take because I look at it like this. If it's like an 80% chance a guy starts or something, and I'm like, that's good enough to put in this lineup. And I'll look at it. If I see lineups and I'm like, this lineup really sucks if I don't take this risk in this guy, I will play and just write the lineup off. If he doesn't play, it was dead anyways. If he does play, it's great. So like, I've sort of tried to move into the middle of things, because almost like everything in life, like most of the time, the correct answer is somewhere in the middle. That's where you find the correct balance of things. So I've tried to go that way, but I think people sometimes end up on, similar to everything else in life, people end up on one end of the spectrum versus the other end of the spectrum. They don't really go more towards the middle end. Like we've seen people that take just really stupid risks with cards they should not be taking risks. I know we've talked about it. AJ hasn't been around for a while, but like AJ used to take these risks. That's just like you look at the line and he plays like Carlos Gil unique, someone else unique. Like these 4 guys are just like unreal. And this situation, like you don't need another guy that's a smasher, and you would play someone that's like 50-50 to start and would bury the line. So like that's a risk you don't need to take. Then I've seen other people that it's like they will not play anyone that has any risk to start at all. And then you look and you're like, all right, you're playing a guy that has a 42 average. Like who gives a shit if he starts or not?
The AJ thing, I think the example I remember was he played De Bruyne when it was like, not that it was clear that he wasn't going to play, but he was like unlikely to play. And I actually think he was in the chat when we talked about it. And he was like, yeah, but if he played, he would smash. And it's like, but he probably was not going to play. And like he had cards that would win without it, but he forced it in because he was like, if he plays, he's great. Anyway, I want to go back to a comment that I appreciate who it's coming from, and I appreciate that I really like it. And it says, the best important thing that doesn't matter is age. People pay 10x price for a younger player who scores the same as an older player. I don't want to say this as like a U23 situation, because like we all know that U23 players have a premium because like they have more utility because we have a U23 situation or a competition. But 24-year-olds and 34-year-olds who score the same, the price differences I don't think are justified given the utility, especially because everyone's like, well, still 10 more years of utility. Nobody should be thinking that. Like, I actually believe maybe that's another thing that doesn't matter, but like the long-term, it's not even long-term planning. It's long-term justification of purchases that I think is what puts people or gets people in trouble with the, I can play this card for 10 years when realistically you're not. Like straight up, you're not.
Yeah, you've in the past you've talked about that. Like I do think the long term of cards does matter. Like knowing that you have a card for 6-8 years is more important than having a card for 1-2 years. Like regardless of what you say about it, like that does come into an implications on things. Like yeah, Jock Kuhn just says Mbappe 10 years utility matters. I agree, but you like you can't just be like this card. A card that is 23 is more valuable most likely than a card that is 33 in the same situation.
I think most people who own these cards, it actually does not matter.
Yeah, but that's wrong, right? Like that's just not factually correct. I agree with you that some of those people it does not matter for. And again, some people value the age and the youth a lot more than some of these other people. Like some people value the old players that smash. Some people want no part of it and want the young players that are okay, that maybe can grow into a smasher. So it's definitely a thing where it's in the middle.
Yeah, I think using Mbappe for anything is absurd, but like, yeah, I think people make suboptimal decisions based on age.
Sure.
I'll put it that way.
I agree with that. Both sides.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I like this also. Yeah, young players have more of a chance to be transferred. That's a risk, meaning like they could go somewhere where they don't play. Shout out Charles de Ketelaere. Let me see what this question is from Malky. Do you think it's important to define a squad size before you create a team? Like, quote, I'm only going to buy 15 players and no more. For me, the hardest thing is too many bargains around to stop. What do you think?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The question was basically like, do you have a specific number of cards you would buy if you were like, if I'm going to do this stack, like how many cards you would actually buy?
I mean, I think realistically, you need like everyone that is a really good play within that team. I guess. I don't know. It's tough. Yeah, you have to have, let me rephrase this. If you're going to do like a stack, you have to have the goalie, like a full stack. Like if you're doing a full stack, you have to have like the goalie and you have to have smashers. If there's a guy, like you have a New England Revs stack and you don't have Carlos Gil, what is the point of having the New England Revs stack? So like if there's a stack that you're trying to do, you have to have the uber alpha. So like that's sort of the way I would go with it. Which like for some of the teams it's more difficult. Like I think there are, to me, Galatasaray, the person that is the difference maker potentially is Angelino. If Angelino is as good as I think he could be, he's the guy that if you don't have Angelino, you're going to look bad, right? But they have a lot of great guys. Like Icardi's really good there previously. Afterglue's really good there. I don't think Afterglue's as worse. Yeah, like Little Lettuce just said Pedro Gonzalez for Sporting. Like if you have a Sporting stack, you don't have Gonzalez, like it's just kind of like, why do you really have that stack? I think it would be like if you have Bayern stack and you don't have Kimmich, and you like, why do you have a Bayern stack then? You should not have a Bayern stack.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Sorry, I was going through the chat here and completely lost what I was going to say. But Haber said, in my opinion, longevity on Sorare is 2 seasons. I don't buy cards expecting 5 to 10 years on them, really. I don't think that's like, I think there are plenty of people who do believe that they were like, I'll have this for 5 years, which is just wild. Because I think if they actually thought like, what will this card be doing in 5 years? And if it's anything remotely close to like what is happening now, I just think you can't possibly think that way. Where was I? Sorare Joel here said no player on Sorare has had 4 years of past utility so far, which is also kind of fun to consider. Sean, what the hell was I just about to say? I read a comment and totally threw me off. Oh, well. Javier here says, I went down from 4 limited teams and 2 rare teams to only 1 rare team, a Ghent Galatasaray stack. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. I also withdrew a little ETH. My goal is to win the most ETH. Is this an optimal or not decision? I mean, having 1 team seems suboptimal if ETH is the goal.
Yeah. I mean, if you want ETH and stuff, like you should be playing all the cap modes, right? I guess. Like limited. We did that. We did like the research on the one day. Like limited cap 240 was the best ROI. Obviously, you're not winning much because you're playing limiteds, but like it was the best ROI at the time. I think that there's probably a likelihood that's like you could probably. I don't look at the limited pricing enough, but I imagine you can make a limited team pretty cheap and be able to hit thresholds on it pretty frequently.
Yeah, it just takes longer because the threshold's only $5 is the problem. And not a problem, but it just takes longer. So it was back to the Galatasaray thing, or you were talking about the most important. You completely skipped who the actual most important player in the Galatasaray stack is.
Well, Galatasaray stack's hard because there's like 8 guys that are really good.
No, it's Muslera. If Muslera doesn't have a clean sheet, your lineup is dead. It's as simple as that.
No, because you could have another goalie that like pops off, but yeah, you're saying.
No, I'm saying if you're running a Galatasaray stack, you are not getting a podium unless they get a clean sheet, or he saves a penalty.
Yeah.
That's all I meant.
Yes,
because goalie is stupid and important at the same time.
That it is.
But I also like this point from Scosmo, which I suppose I glossed over, but he said age is just resellability, not lifetime personal utility, which makes sense that A, you have more time to sell them, and B, they could get better to then sell them on top of that. So Mike Basson said Muslera is the Turkish Armani, which I love since I own both. But the Parapress does point out or asks, does Muslera retire at the end of the season? Haber says yes.
Who knows? I mean, in theory, you're not paying that much for him anymore. Well, actually, his price point's up a bit, I think.
He's definitely up.
You'd probably still pay it off, though, within the year. Like, if you have a proper functioning stack, like, I don't 0.3, like, you're fine if he retires. Like, obviously, again, this goes to your age thing. Like, I'd rather have someone that is 0.3 that is 25 that's going to give me longer longevity out of it, but still. I
think the problem with Muslera is that this sounds really bad when I'm going to say it out loud. The fact that he's not Brazilian or Argentinian, that if he goes home to Uruguay, like they're not covered.
That's fair.
So I have no idea if he wants to go back, but there's like a little bit of safety in some of those guys that are like, oh, you can go play in Argentina until you're 46. And I mean, he could do that, I guess, but nobody knows. Muslera was actually one of the reasons I was hesitant to make a Galatasaray stack, because it's like a 1 year rental. Keep in mind, I own Brad Guzan, rare and super rare, so maybe that actually makes it worse for Muslera in my own thought, because I'm like, oh, he's just dust. Not that Guzan's dust. If anybody wants to buy a Guzan, I'm happily accepting offers. So anyway, we have any others? I mean, I guess it's good that we don't, because it means like people are mostly doing things well.
Yeah, like I don't know, like there's definitely other things. I'm trying to think. Oh, you're gonna agree with this one for sure. People that act like every single game week is the same for a player, and that like a 70 average player is 70 average every game week. That 100% is one. Like people act like a player is the same player every single game week, and it's just not true. The matchup matters and dictates what the player is. So like if Kimmich is playing a certain team, I would expect more or less out of Kimmich depending on what the team is that he's playing. And I think that is where people really struggle. Like everyone's like Mbappe is the best player as they play away at Man City. No, this game week he's not. This is what keeps him at a 70 average instead of an 80 average is games like this. And I think that's something that people definitely screw up a lot.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And it actually goes into another one that I actually feel like fewer people are doing now, but it's still quite prevalent that people like they're like, this is my challenger team for this season, and just expect to play those 5 guys every game week. And it's
that tweet, I see that tweet so much as like, this is my
okay. So maybe it hasn't slowed down.
Like, dude, that is not how it works at all.
So yeah, like I have conversations with people about like plans for like the upcoming European season, and I just struggle when that becomes part of the conversation. They're like, so this is what I'm going to run in All-Star. This is what I'm going to run in Challenger. This is what I'm going to run Champion. And I'm just like, so what do you do when like one of your guys has just like the worst matchup? Because usually people don't have like the best players in these lineups. And so like, all right, well, what do you do? And they were like, well, I just, maybe I'll find someone else. I'm like, all right, well, now this is where we talk about depth. And they're like, so this is the lineup I would run if they all had perfect fixtures. And it was like, well, do they? And they're like, well, I don't know. And it's like, you can go the entire season and see like where everybody lines up. Do they actually ever line up perfectly? And it's like, well, no. And you're like, well, let's do a little more work then.
Yeah. Like I'll use Carlos Gil example here too on this. We all know that I'm a big Carlos Gil fan. And that I think he's very good for the platform, which he is. But Laird can confirm this. If you actually talk to me and we're talking about Gil and stuff, I have a pretty damn good track record of calling when Gil's going to put up a massive game compared to when I see in a matchup that isn't as favorable. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not as excited about him. Like, I think people just think I blindly play Gil 100% of the time in like my most important line. I did not play him in my Gas 3 lineup against New York Red Bulls because New York Red Bulls matchup is ass cheeks. And I was like, yeah, I'm not super duper excited about it. Then I'm like, Carlos Gil at home against DC United. I'm like, yeah, that's going to be 100 or it's going to be smash. Or it's like, I see him at home against Atlanta. I'm like, yeah, it's going to be a smash. And then I see him on the road against Philly. I'm like, all right, I mean, he's still okay. Like, it's not like he's ever going to be terrible because of who he is in reality, because he's never going to be that massive of an underdog. Most guys like that are the elite level players are never horrendous, right? Like, it's never like there's a spot where Mbappe is horrendous. Even against like Man City, he can still get a goal and get to like 70, 80 points. But there are certain matches where you look at and you're just like, but so anyways, the matchup matters. So like we talked about at the end of the year with Melly Muhlenstein. Like, he was a elite level defender multiple times the last month and a half of the season. And I was playing Melly Muhlenstein as like the top #1 defender in my gallery for some of these games. So I see them at home against Groningen. I'm like, yep, this is a great card. I see him at home against Camber. I'm like, yep, this is a great card. I see him on the road against Feyenoord. I'm like, yeah, this is not a great card. And it's just, there are cards. You have to look at a card. This is the best way I can explain looking at a card. If you look at a card and this guy cannot put up massive scores, then it doesn't really matter who they play. because he's just not realistically going to hit a high-end score. Versus if you have a guy that has a pretty elite level matchup and he will maybe put up like 5 big scores a year, you can still use that to your advantage with if you can pinpoint like when you think those 5 games will be and play him in a more prioritized lineup based on that. And I think there's guys that I mean, one of our favorites that we talk about a lot is Vlahovic. And we're just like, Vlahovic just is going to get you 60 to 70 if he scores, and that's it. And you just aren't going to get a high score. So it's like the only way I'm ever going to play Vlahovic in a lineup where it's like legitimately a decent to like really high-end lineup is if they're playing like the worst team in the league and Vlahovic has a chance at a hat trick. If I don't think Vlahovic can get a hat trick, I'm not going to play Vlahovic in a big lineup. And it works for like defenders and center backs. Like I'll give an example of a Revs teammate. Andrew Farrell is just not going to get you many decisives. So like Andrew Farrell's kind of capped out at a okay play. So if you look at Farrell, like Farrell has like 580s in 120 games. Like that's not going to cut it for me in like a gas 3 lineup. But if they have a really good matchup, maybe I can move them to like gas 2. So you have to. People just look at name recognition and just say that this player is the best player and I'm playing him. When in reality, like this is not always true from just a both name perspective and then also there are certain spots where guys are just not as good of cards as they are most weeks, and you just have to be able to recognize that.
Yeah, I don't want to say that you should make your lineups blindly because obviously that's not it. But like that's one of the reasons I like the SorareData pick scores or the suggested lineup, because it at least like opens your eyes to situations that, oh, this guy's matchup isn't that good or this one is great. And so Little Lettuce actually kind of alludes to this. So do you think that players' names matter or not? Probably not a great example, but everyone knows Kimmich and only, quote, a few people know Marvin Wannitzek, and they have similar scores, but one costs 4 times more than the other. Like I think that there are situations where Wannitzek's probably too good, but I think there are situations where like he's probably the better play over Kimmich. Doesn't happen often,
Sure.
but like it could happen. And people are just going to look at Kimmich and be like, no, I have to play Kimmich.
Yeah.
And that's wrong.
Yeah, that's wrong. And it's just a situation like that. And like you have to know what the player is too. Like you have to know what type of outcome you can expect from a player. Like if I play Carlos Gil, I know if he gets a decisive, I have a pretty good shot to get 80 to 90 points. Like just what it is. So it's just like you're playing him and you're like, well, I have a 50% chance he gets a decisive and gets 80 to 90 plus. Well, that's pretty damn good. So you play him. Whereas like, yeah, you look at, I think maybe a good example would have been Terrier versus other champ forwards. And like people would look at Terrier and they would also have like Victor Osimhen. And they'd be like, I'm going to play Osimhen because I know Osimhen. When in reality, Terrier is most likely a much better play and was much, much cheaper. Grant, I mean, he was more expensive at times, and he got up there towards the end right before he tore his ACL. But there's a good probability that like Terrier is a much better play than other forward cards that have more name recognition. And
Vlahovic.
Definitely gravitate to it. Who?
Vlahovic.
Great example, Vlahovic. Like, there's definitely guys like that will like cater. Like, yeah, Vlahovic. I mean, I don't know how much Vlahovic is going for right now. Let me see if I can sort of.
It's absurd still.
Yeah, like I mean, man, it bugs out.
Is there really like nobody buying his? That can't be right. Something's gonna be.
So the last trade of Vlahovic, I don't know. I don't think it's well.
Yeah,
actually,
nobody's moving. They don't have any auctions. That's why. So it like doesn't move at this point.
Yes, we don't even know because like I'm getting an error when I go to this Spicy versus Pal Trader where it just like goes back to click on the details. It's just sending me back to this page.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on with it. But yeah, so like Lewandowski's a good example, Benzema's a good example. Those guys are all gonna smash well, but like there's just different opportunities and different guys that can sometimes be better plays than other people. And I think that people get tied up with the name recognition. But people get tied up with the name recognition like within the game, and they're like, this guy, Cecina is a good example. And they'll be like, Cecina's smashing his face off. This weekend, for example, Cecina plays Ulsan away. So it's like the worst matchup in the league. But people are going to be like, Cecina playing my most important line. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, the issue here is that they're playing the worst matchup of the season.
Yeah.
He's not Cecina. He's the worst version of Cecina. In
Literally.
Literally for that game. And then the next week they play Suwon Blue Wings at home, and it's like, all right, now he's the best version of Cecina. So like all of these scores go into his average to get his L40 of 64. In order to get an L40 of 64, you have to have these 30s and 40s that are terrible to offset the 80s and 90s. And like that game is more likely to be that than it is to be the 80 to 90 type. Not saying he can't do it, because he can, but it's less likely than it is other times.
Yeah. Going to Vlahovic's player page made me realize like he checks so many boxes of this conversation. Like he has 43 rares, which like isn't that many, but his scores are terrible and people play him. And I feel like people will play him because they have to recoup how much they paid for him, which is, I don't even know. It's never good when you see Pavel is 4 of the last 5 buyers.
Well, I will say, here's a funny story with this stuff. The people that we typically give shit to, like the players on here, we typically end up like those guys crash and burn hard. Like, not saying all the guys that we talk up end up being great cards or anything, but like the guys that we're like, this card is stupid and I have no idea why it's going for this, like crash and burn. Like him, just crash and burn. Kulishevsky as a midfield card, just like,
it's even a good
I mean, it's not as bad of a forward card, but it's not good. But like, yeah, I was literally like, I was looking at Cool last year. Like he went through like he literally didn't crack 80. He cracked 80 once last year. And that maybe twice.
Pre-Spurs? Oh no, that is.
But like, we shit talk this card and we got a bunch of poop for it, and it's like, typically when we are like, this guy is a trash can card, they're like Kai Havertz. Which actually, again, I have backtracked with his new.
I was going to say that the PSU backtrack on Kai Havertz is one of my favorite so rare things right now.
But it's completely reasonable because he's completely changing as a player in theory. His new role with Arsenal, he has a shot to be usable. I don't think he really can ever be good, but I think he can be usable.
Yeah, you're willing to move him up from cap 220 to cap 240.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the past, you just wouldn't use him. Was my Belonga take just that he was like just getting a decisive and then he wouldn't continue to smash like that? Because I think that's what it was, Blue Tomato.
Yeah, he ran hotter than the sun, that guy.
But yeah, typically the guys that we talk about are guys that are like sun running decisives and have no AA game whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And we're just like, this isn't going to last forever.
Yep.
Yeah. So like, yeah, so Belonga, like people were like people want to pay like heaping piles for Belonga when he was like in that 92, like when he had those 3 monsters, and it just wasn't realistic that he was going to sustain it. I don't think Belonga is a bad card. I think he's a card that like having him, there's some merit to it, right? Like I don't think it's a bad card, but like people were paying at one point like 3. Great example, and this guy isn't as a big of a smash. This guy's a smasher and people love him, but his price has just collapsed because the horseshoes came out of his butt for a few games. Hani Mukhtar, where you and I have just been like, Hani Mukhtar is not as good as all these other mids.
So yeah, that is absolutely true. He is not nearly as good. I will say that the run was so much longer though than thought it should have been.
But even
at some point,
run, like his scoring just wasn't. He's not scoring 80 pluses that frequently. Like he has 2 like on the season. He has 2 80 pluses on the season. So in theory, he's just not getting the job done. Like if you are sitting there and you just cannot crack 75 and you have a decisive or 2 every single game, it just doesn't get the job done. So Joe says Mukhtar should be a forward. 100%. Don't know why he's not. If he was a forward card, it is a much more appealing card than his midfield card.
Carlos Heel thinks he's a forward. Don't worry about it. What? Carlos Heel thinks Hani Mukhtar is a forward.
Well, Carlos,
I don't know if you saw it when they had Carlos Heel do
it. We know Laird, so that's not surprising.
They had Carlos Heel do his best SO5 lineup, and he picked 3 midfielders because he picked Hani Mukhtar as his forward.
Yeah, but yeah, like you look at it, Hani Mukhtar averages 5 points a game more as a forward than as a mid. His forward card would be like the top forward card in the MLS by a lot. Like I think it would be the significantly best forward card. But like earlier in the year, people were treating his midfield card as like the best midfield card in the region. It just was never the case. Like if you look, he was selling for more than Gil or close to Gil at some points.
It was close, yeah.
Oh, I did forget Messi. Sorry, Matchlow. Matchlow's correct. I was thinking back in the day. But yeah, like Hani Mukhtar was selling for like half an ETH like a couple months ago. And I was like, Zala's better, Acosta's better, Reynosa's better, Gil's way better. Gald is better.
Would you rather a Hani Mukhtar forward card over like Cucho or Savarino?
Yeah, not close. Hani Mukhtar is a forward card, is the best card in the MLS other than Messi. But like his midfield card, like I don't think he's a top. I don't think you could convince me he's a top 5 mid in the MLS from a Sorare perspective. Like I don't think there's any way you could convince me of that right now.
I'm actually wondering if he's even in the top 10.
Yeah, I think he's in the top 10. I mean, we can look at it right now.
I am looking at it right now. Reynoso, Lucho, Gil, Gald, Almada, Zelarayan, Puig.
Those 7, I definitely take over him.
Yeah, it kind of ends there. Hector Herrera, maybe.
I think that's the ending point of it. But I think that 7. All right, here's a question, Laird. So I will.
That's also just MLS, though. That's also not like America.
Correct. I'm just talking MLS here. So here's my question for you, Laird. I had a rankings list that did not include Almada for MLS. How do you think I ranked them? And I used gap. So I went like 1 is this guy, 2 is this guy, 3 is this guy, gap, 4, like wherever I put it. So using this list, how do you think I did the MLS mids?
I think Gil's by himself.
Okay.
And then the next one is Reynoso, Zelarayan, and I'll say the next gap, there's a small gap, and then Lucho and Puig, and then the next gap to everyone else.
Yeah, so at the time, I didn't put Puig in there, but I should have. And watching him,
Reynoso, did I?
You said Reynoso. So
I did. Right.
I said that it is. This is how I started, and then I changed it. My original, and this wasn't including Almada. If you include Almada's at the top of the list. I just left him off because I didn't think that he fit in this discussion as well because he has a lot more transfer risk, and
he's not supposed to be here.
Yeah, if you have Almada, you're realistically not usually playing him in this spot, right? You're playing U23 most of the time. So the original rankings, and I did change it slightly, was Gil, Gap, Reynoso, Lucho, Zala, Gap, Mukhtar, Gald. That's how I originally did it.
Yeah.
I came back though and changed it, and this is going to surprise you. Gil, Reynoso, Gap, Lucho, Zala, Gap, Gald, Gap, Mukhtar.
Yeah, I mean,
now I put Puig with Gald. With Gald. I think I put him with Gald right now.
I think the lesson though is that Mukhtar is nowhere near the list.
Correct. Yeah, that's like I don't think it's close. Like, I do not think you could argue Reynoso, or I don't think you could argue Mukhtar over Almada, Gil, Reynoso, Lucho, Zala. I don't think you could argue him over those. I think you could argue him versus Puig and Gald. But even then, I don't even know if you can.
No chance.
So
not for me. I wouldn't even listen.
No, I wouldn't either. Like for me, he's clear 7. Like Quinny said, I dare you to say Mukhtar stuffed him McGrath. I happily say it. I told Nepenthez this too, because Nepenthez had his super, and it's a good card, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I'm like, he's distantly behind these other guys to me. It's not even close. Like, Like, I think those 6 that we mentioned. This was the other name that was in the list that I didn't consider. Puig, like Almada, you're probably using U23. Yes and no. I think Puig isn't as good as Almada, if that makes sense. Like, Almada is like definitely going U23. You might not play Puig there. But maybe you can. Like,
Puig is so much better than I give him credit for.
Puig?
Yeah.
I agree. I've been watching their games because it just so happened my lineups have been really good with Puig in like the last 3 game weeks. The entire game just runs through Puig like it does with these other guys. And LA Galaxy sucked. But
They're
like
so
Puig is getting more and more responsibilities lately, and I've been very impressed with him more so than I was previously. Like, I obviously watched some of their games anyways. I don't think Surge is going to be that much of an impact for Mook.
Right.
Maybe.
Like, no chance.
He's still the same guy, right? He's still a midfielder that's going to lose a boatload of possessions that is a goal-dependent striker. That's what he is. Again, he's not a bad card. Like, I'm not saying he's terrible, but he's just way worse than what people thought. And that has come down clearly by price points now. Like, if you look at the price points and you see the prices, Almada is actually really cheap. Holy shit. But Mukhtar is now priced with below all these guys. A while ago, Mukhtar was above all these guys, and it made no sense. And that's when
and like firmly above them.
Yeah. Firmly above them, like well above them. Whereas now it is much different, and he's like below all of them. Because now the current price points are Gil, Gap, Almada, Gap, Reynoso, Zela, Acosta, Puig, Gap, Mukhtar. Like, he's now below them. Like, right now with where he is, I think Mukhtar's fine. Like, I still wouldn't buy him per se because he has the risk to leave and all that stuff. But yeah, it's a situation. Oh, this was the other guy that I had mentioned that was in the list in the discussion was Hector Herrera. He was the other guy that was like sort of in this group, and he would definitely be at the bottom of the group. So the question I have for you, would you take Hector Herrera or would you take Mukhtar?
Herrera.
Okay.
I'm not even thinking about it.
Okay. Yeah, he was the one that was there.
I want to show exactly why Sean and I put such an emphasis on all-around scores and why we're such Hani Mukhtar haters. So I have up here, let me actually pull it up here. So this is the America mids. And actually, I'll even just reduce it down to MLS to prove my point here. So we default by L15, of which you will find Hani Mukhtar 25th. Sean is a big L40 guy, which I get. And if you go by L40, Mukhtar like moves up the list significantly to, what is that? 2, 4, 6, 8th. However, you can very clearly see that he has like by far the worst all-around average in any time frame. Like, he's a 6.1 over his last 5 and 15 and 8.8 over his last 40. And when you have a low AA and the decisives dry up, you get this exact point here of the somewhat dark green L40, slightly lighter L15, and the yellow L5. Because like, if you are not scoring a goal or getting an assist, you're in the mid 40s. And you cannot be one of these elite players scoring like that. It just you can't do it.
Yeah, the one that's closest to him is Lucho, right? Like, Lucho, as you look here, Lucho has the worst AA of this group, longer term. But I also think that the team is much better in Cincinnati than it was previously. That's why you see his L5, L13, L15, L40 have trended upwards and a better AA as he's gone. But Lucho is definitely a more similar to Hani than he is with these other guys. Like, if you look, like Reynoso has an 18 AA. Gil has a 20 AA. Like, these guys are double-digit AAs higher than what Gald is. Or, I'm sorry, what Mukhtar is. And so Mukhtar, again, like, sometimes I think that when we bash a card like this, people are just like, oh my God, you think he's the worst card on the platform. No, that is still John Duran or whatever, or Tehran or whatever his name is. The center back forward card that's out there.
Yeah.
That's the worst card on the platform. Kai Havertz, one of the worst cards on the platform. Previously. 04, isn't it 04?
that what you said?
Oh yeah, it's 04. You're right. It's 04. Yeah, I get literally all those guys confused. But yeah, it was 04. You're right. But like, I'm not saying Mukhtar is the worst card on the platform. I'm saying he is like the 8th best mid in the MLS. That's what I'm saying with Mukhtar. And that is sometimes. So I just want to make it clear that like we don't think he's just a steaming pile of poop. We think that he is a good card that people were acting like Carlos Gil, and he's not Carlos Gil.
Yeah. So like just this example, and I realized Brugman just got hurt and Sean just got a super, so apologies for bringing that up. But like if you just look at how similar their L40 is, like Mukhtar's at 61.4 and Brugman's at 60.3. Brugman has a higher L15 and a higher L5. The decisive scores are similar, but the AAs are just not remotely close. And so like why is Hani Mukhtar even ahead of Gaston Brugman?
So I would take Hani Mukhtar over Brugman if healthy. Like I would rather have Mukhtar over Brugman just because you're more likely to get decisive. Brugman struggles to get decisives. When he does, he puts up a good score though.
Right. But also Hani Mukhtar is, I have it in fiat here, $346, and Brugman is less than a third. And that's probably that's probably unfair because he just got hurt. But let's see. Recently he was 160, 200. I mean, he's like half the price.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which I think his price now is, if you want to buy him, I think this is a reasonable price point to come in at. But again, like I look at him like, all right, Hector Herrera is half the price.
Oh, yeah.
I'd probably rather have Hector Herrera.
Even Espinoza's closer for me.
I'm well familiar, obviously, with Espy, and I think he's a great player, but I don't know if I want Espy.
All right.
I would take Mukhtar over Espy.
Yeah, I don't actually care about either of those players, but yeah. Anyway, I feel bad because Mark Sullivan just said, "Woo, I'm catching you guys live," just as I was like, "All right, we're done."
Perfect timing, Mark.
Sorry, Mark. Thank you to everybody for joining us. It seems like there are a lot of people here and not a lot of people have liked the video. And that's actually just hitting the like button. I don't care if you like the video. If you're still here, just hit it. Makes me feel good. That's all. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll, I don't know what the plan is yet for next week. I was going to take the week off and Sean's giving me a really hard time because he wants to get the keys to the car and we'll see what happens. So we'll see. But anyway, good luck to everyone this week and we'll see you later.